Maybe you're in a season like me where you feel like God is stretching you. He's calling you into something that just feels terrifying. Like that's how I usually describe this season. I'm looking at it like it seems exciting. I know God is going to do something great, but it feels terrifying, largely because it's outside of my control. It's a whole nother sermon in that. Uh, but I feel like God has something to share with me as well as with you in this passage in 1 Kings 17, where Elijah is sent to a widow to provide for him. So I want to give you a little bit of backdrop about what's about to happen here in 1 Kings 17. The king at the time was named Ahab, and he was evil in the sight of the Lord, and he was married to the daughter of the king of Sidon. Her name was Jezebel. They were a bad couple. And Jezebel does not like the Lord and his prophets. They worshiped Baal. And so King Ahab was also worshiping Baal with his wife. And so Elijah pronounces a drought on all of the land. And God was providing for Elijah through the ravens. And when the brook dried up where Elijah was getting his water from, God sent him to this widow. And here is what it says in 1 Kings 17, verses 8 through 16. It says, "Then the Lord said to Elijah, go and live in the village of Zarephath near the city of Sidon. I have instructed a widow there to feed you." So he went to Zarephath. And as he arrived at the gates of the village, he saw a widow gathering sticks, and he asked her, "Would you please bring me a little water in a cup?" And as she was going to get it, he called to her, "Bring me a bite of bread too." But she said, "I swear by the Lord your God that I don't have a single piece of bread in the house, and I have only a little cooking oil, only a handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of the jug. I have just gathered a few sticks to cook this last meal, and then my son and I will die." But Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you've said, but make a little bread for me first. Then use what's left to prepare a meal for yourself and your son. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There will always be flour and olive oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and the crops grow again." So she did as Elijah said, and she and Elijah and her family continued to eat for many days. There was always enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. So there are a couple things that I notice here. One, we know that Ahab was married to this chick named Jezebel, and she's the daughter of the king of Sidon. So she's like princess of Sidon. Sidon, they don't like the God of Israel. They worship Baal. And here we have a prophet of the Lord, Elijah, where God says, "Go and live in the village of Zarephath near the city of Sidon. I have instructed a widow there to feed you." Now, I don't know about you, but if I know that my enemies are in Sidon, guess where I don't want to be? In Sidon. I want to be near, I want to be far, far away. And surely the last thing that I am going to expect is my provision to come from enemy territory, my provision to come from perhaps someone who does not even worship my God. But here's the really cool thing about God. God can use anyone in any place that he desires to meet the needs of his people who are going to do his work, like Elijah. And so I love this here. I have instructed a widow there to feed you. Isn't it awesome that whatever it is that God is asking you to do, he has already gone before you. He has already laid out the provision. He has already instructed someone or something to provide for you if he is sending you there. The Lord goes before me. And then here's the really cool thing. The scriptures simply say, so he went. So he went. The Lord told this man to go to enemy territory and to find a widow, a widow. And we know that widows in this century, in this time, they were poor. They were poor and they were helpless. They were the people who were marginalized and on the edge because they did not have a husband, another provider to take care of them. And it sounds like her son is still young. And so he's not the one who is providing for her. She's still trying to provide for him. But yet and still God says, you know what? I'm gonna send you to a poor woman. And I have instructed her to feed you. Just let that simmer just for a bit. God is sending Elijah into what seems like a terrifying situation to me. I'm in enemy territory and you want a poor lady to take care of me. Okay, God, here we go. And when she gets there, what's amazing to me is that she was okay. Like, I'll bring you some water. Okay, I can bring you some water. And then Elijah asked for more and she's like, look, I ain't got it. I ain't got it. And sometimes what I find interesting is that God may be sending us to someone or to something, and God has made provision or is making provision. And even that person may not even know it. They may not even know that God is going to use them in this grander story. But here's the thing that I appreciate about her. Just as Elijah had the faith to where the scriptures say God sent him to this place, and so he went into enemy territory. When Elijah spoke to this woman who was like, look, I ain't got it. Me and my boy, we about to die. Okay, that's what's about to happen here. But Elijah's like, do what you're gonna do, but first, make some bread for me. And so she did. The scriptures say in verse 15, just like Elijah did in verse 10, so she did as Elijah said. And then her family continued to eat. Of course, Elijah had already laid out, look, the Lord will provide for you. And the promise comes true. Verse 16, there was always enough food and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. There was always enough. I know that there are times where we can feel like there is not enough. I am not enough. My circumstances are not enough. God, how is all of this going to work out? But we serve a God of miracles. And when God asks you to do the seemingly impossible, when God asks you to walk into what feels like enemy territory or may be enemy territory, when God asks you to give up the last of what you have in order to provide for someone else, or when God asks you to go and trust him and that he will provide wherever it is that he is sending you, you have to look in and have the faith and obedience to go and do what God has called you to do, and be able to dig your faith into passages like these in 1 Kings 17, where God continues to show himself faithful, where God continues to show himself as a great provider. And so I want to encourage you that whatever God has called you to do, whatever he has put in your heart, a ministry, a calling, a people that he is sending you to, I want you to trust him. I want you to trust him when he tells you to go. And I am preaching to myself. Trust. I am preaching to myself. That our faith and obedience have to go together. That our faith has to say, you know what, God, I believe that you are going before me, that if you said that you have prepared for me, that if you have called me to this, you are going to make a way. And so because I believe that, I will walk in obedience. And oftentimes I think this is where we fall short. We have the faith, we believe, perhaps mentally and emotionally in our heart, that God is who he is, that he is the great provider, that he is in control, that he knows all of our needs. He knows the hairs of like he is God. But sometimes our faith does not result in obedience, right? Our faith does not prompt us to action because we know the scriptures say that faith without deeds is dead in the book of James. And so I want us to really lean into this and then just trust there will always be enough. There will always be enough. There will always be enough. And I believe that if you trust God with your life, with your resources, with whatever it is that you have, God will always show up and there will always be enough. There may not be as much as you want there to be every now and then. Um, People are like, so what's this going to cost? And I'm like, $1 million. One day someone is going to be like, sure, I'll write the check for $1 million, but God will give me enough. He might not give me $1 million, but he will give me enough to sustain me, to sustain my family, for the things that he is calling me to do. And so I just wanted to encourage you today to trust God, to lean into whatever it is that he is asking you to do, and to believe that he has already made a provision, and to also recognize that your provision may come from a place that you are not expecting it to come from. It may come from someone who you think does not have the resources, and they might even say they don't have the resources. It may come from a place uh, that does not feel like it is for you, that they are enemies, that they are not on the same side. But if God can send Elijah to a town right outside of Sidon and find a widow who would feed him, and God would provide for the widow so that the widow could provide for him, trust that God is going to do something miraculous to make sure that uh, the servant of God is taken care of in the season that he has called them to. All right, guys. Love you.